What's it going to be then, eh? There was me, that is Alex, and my three droogs, that is Pete, Georgie, and Dim. Dim being really dim. And we sat in the Korova milk bar making up our rassadooks what to do with the evening. A flip dark chill winter bastard through dry. The Korova milk bar was a milk plus mesto, and you may, oh my brothers, have forgotten what these mestos were like. Things changing so scorry these days, and everybody very quick to forget. Newspapers not being read much neither. Well, what they sold there was milk plus something else. They had no license for selling liquor, but there was no law yet against prodding some of the new viches which they used to put into the old Moloko. So you could peat it with Valicet or Synthamesk or Drencrom, or one or two other viches which would give you a nice quiet horror show 15 minutes admiring Bog and all these holy angels and saints in your left shoe with lights bursting all over your mozg. Or you could peat milk with knives in it, as we used to say, and this would sharpen you up and make you ready for a bit of dirty 20 to 1. And that was what we were peating this evening I'm starting off the story with. Welcome back to Archer's World of Literature, guys. Today we are going to be doing Anthony Burgess's 1962 A Clockwork Orange. Now, apologies if I've pronounced his name wrong. This is the book that one of the most notorious movies ever made was based off, A Clockwork Orange. Now, we're going to start off with what this book is about. So A Clockwork Orange follows Alex. He's a 15-year-old, and his sort of youth gang, right? So we've got Dim, we've got Pete, we've got Georgie, and we've got Alex, who's sort of the ringleader. Now, they love what is called ultra-violence. So ultra-violence is like rape and like killing people and just bashing up people for fun. They're just a terrible, terrible youth gang. That's what they are. It's set in like a dystopian future. Some aspects very similar to George Orwell's 1984, where it's very dystopian and they're all sort of dressed in like, all black clothes, and they've got kind of like steampunk attire, and like, the girls have colourful hair and all these sort of things. And this is very different for its time, because you've got to keep in mind this was released in 1962, and like coloured hair and, like spiked armoured piercings and stuff like that is, wasn't really written about that much back then. But we follow these characters, and they start off sort of just showing us what they're about, and they're just going around and they're just attacking old men, they're sexually assaulting women, they're starting bar fights. They're terrible, terrible people, right? And so what happens is, eventually, Alex sort of starts thinking that some of his gang members are going to overthrow him and sort of try and be the leader, right? And eventually they sort of find their way into this home invasion situation where they're going to invade this old lady's house. And so what they will do is they knock on the front door, and Alex will be there and all his gang members will be hiding. And Alex will go, "Oh, please, miss, one of my friends has hurt themselves across the road. Can we please come in and have some water or something? Or can we use the phone to call the police?" And then when she goes back out to call the police or whatnot, like they'll run in and they'll just start attacking her and stealing things and all that sort of stuff. So what happens is they go to this old lady's house, and she actually says no. She's like, "No, go away." She closes the door, and then Alex actually, hoists up onto Dim's shoulders, and he climbs through the window, and he sneaks down, and he starts attacking her, and then there's this kind of funny scene. So he starts, trying to steal things or whatever, and the old lady comes at him and tries and attacks him. He attacks back, and then it's actually a crazy cat lady, right? So all her cats come and like attack him. They're like ripping his legs and they're shredding him to pieces. And he's kicking the cats away, and then eventually he pushes the old lady over, and she dies. And then he hears police sirens. He walks out the door, and his friends have actually run off. They've betrayed him. They're running off. They never came inside the house, and he's basically, he collapses on the front porch, and the police take him. So that's sort of the first part. The book's separated into three parts. The second part is actually when he goes to jail. So pretty much the entirety of part two is just him being in jail. And towards the end of part two, he actually gets elected to be part of this new criminal reformation scheme, right? And so this new scheme is to try and reform criminals to make them be disgusted with violence, and then they'll release them and they'll never, commit violent acts ever again. And so he's submitted to the acts of the work of Dr. Brodsky, and I think it's Dr. Brannon is his assistant. And so he goes into this new facility, and they're feeding him nice food, and compared to the prison he was in, where it was 6 people to a room, he's sitting in this sort of like, it's kind of like a facility, right? Like it kind of feels like a rehab facility or a hospital. And he's got his own bed, and he's getting, 3 meals a day. He's getting chai milk tea, all these things. And he goes in and he says, so how are we going to, how does this whole program work? And they're just like, oh, we're just going to feed you up and look after you, and you're just going to watch some movies. And Alex goes, oh, well, I love the movies, right? This is amazing. I'm going to be released in a fortnight, and I just get to watch movies. So on the first day, they take him to like the cinema part of this facility. And he goes into the middle room, and there's a seat in the middle, and there's kind of like a tinted window thing behind him where he feels like there's some scientists watching him or whatever. And there's a big projector in front of him, and there's all these wires going from the seat to the side of the wall and stuff. And he's a little bit skeptical, and he's like, "What's going on?" But then he's like, "Oh, whatever. I just get to watch movies, and I'll be out in a fortnight. I'll do whatever I have to do." Right? They strap him down, and they force his eyelids open, and they connect this thing to his scalp with all these wires connecting to the walls, and they strap his arms down, his legs down, his back down, his head to the headrest, and his eyes are being forced open. And he says to Dr. Brodsky, is like, oh, this must be a pretty amazing like film if you don't want me to miss, blink my eyes, you don't want me to miss anything, right? And Dr. Brodsky sort of laughs it off and goes, haha, yes, and then Alex sort of says, why would I close my eyes? I want to watch a movie, that sounds great. And then he's like, Dr. Brodsky's like, oh, we'll see, right? And so they turn off the lights, and Alex is in the room on his own, and they start playing footage of basically violent murders, tortures, home invasions, rapes, all these kind of things. And Alex sort of starts. It's all the things that Alex and his gang were doing, right? All these brutal things. Like he's showing old Japanese war executions and like Nazi footage of concentration camps and home invasions and youth gangs doing the exact same things, whatever. And Alex sort of goes, oh, this is the stuff that I was doing. But as he starts watching it more and more, he sort of realizes it's a lot more awful to see it on the screen than to actually do it. He sort of says, oh, well, it's not that bad when I do it. But when I'm watching it on the screen, it's awful, right? So essentially what they're doing is when they're injecting Alex with a drug, right, before they take him to watch these movies. And so they tell him, oh, they're just vitamins, they're just to make you healthy because you're so skinny after you've been to prison, you haven't been eating well, all these things. And Alex starts to notice that when he's watching these films of these brutal murders and these violent acts and things like that, he's feeling really, really sick. He's feeling like this gut-wrenching illness. And so he starts to realize over this fortnightly period of watching these movies every day that what they're injecting him with is this drug to make him feel sick. And so actually what they're doing is they're conditioning Alex to feel sick when he's thinking about violent acts or seeing violent acts or wanting to commit violent acts. So they're conditioning him to not do that when they release him after this fortnightly period. And so that's sort of the second act, and then at the end of the second act he gets released back into society, right? And so the third act, I'm not going to go into as much detail for the third act because I don't want to ruin it for you, but the third act is kind of this big discussion of the themes of free will and morality and stuff, which I'm going to go into a little bit later, like I said. And it's kind of a little bit comedic because he's back in the real world. He feels sick when he wants to commit violent acts, and he actually, throughout the entirety of the third part, he's encountering pretty much every single person that he previously attacked, like all these old men. He sees these old men in the library. He sees his old friends from the gang that betrayed him and stuff. They beat him up. The old men in the library beat him up, and he can't do anything about it because he's been conditioned to not do anything. He's going to feel like vomiting if he thinks of retaliating or anything like that. So apart from that sort of stuff, there is this big discussion of whether the government is inherently evil for trying to control people and condition them to not be able to make their own choices, whether it's for the good or for the bad. Alex meets some people that are anti-government and think that what they're doing is corruption and trying to control the youth and all these sort of things. And that's what reminds me of... this book kind of reminds me of George Orwell's 1984 because there is this sort of secret society of people that are opposing the government and things like that. And the people that Alex meets, they want to use Alex as this staple and this lighthouse, figure for, for their propaganda to say that the government is inherently evil. And I'm not going to go into the ending because I don't want to ruin it for you, but the third act is definitely the most gripping. It's the most exciting and compelling, and you can hardly put it down. So Anthony Burgess, with this book, he actually, people think that it's a bit of a hard read because he actually invented his own fictional language. It was roughly based on Russian and Czechoslovakian kind of Eastern European countries. And it's a fictional language. So this book is in English, but every third word is actually a made-up word. And so the youth gangs in this book, and it's kind of like the hip and cool way to talk in this dystopian future, is Nadsat. So the language that Burgess created is Nadsat. So Oddy Nokkies means on my own. A millicent is a policeman. And then sometimes when they're talking to adults in this book, when Alex and his gang are talking to adults, the adults are like, what the hell are you speaking? And he's like, oh, it's Nadsat. That's what all the kids speak these days. So there are some pretty big themes in A Clockwork Orange. The primary one being the ability to choose and make a choice, and how as soon as you can't make your own decisions and your own choices, you're not human anymore. That's kind of what this book tackles with. And so when he's been forced through this criminal reformation program to feel sick when he thinks about criminal acts and violent acts, there are people in this book who think that there's a lot of dialogue about how, what they're doing is kind of like they're trying to stop crime and stuff, which is a good thing, but forcing people to not be able to make their own decisions on whether they want to be a criminal or whatnot is inherently evil. So there's people in this book who think the government is corrupt and inherently evil for forcing people to not be criminals, essentially, and not be violent. And so there's a lot of talk about how, society and the government sort of promoting Alex when he gets out as like this big success of their new program to stop criminals. But then there are these people who are against the government who Alex meets later, and they sort of say, oh, Alex, you poor boy, you've been subject to the inherent evil of the government and stuff. And they want to use Alex as sort of like a staple of their propaganda for saying that the government is inherently evil, trying to overthrow the government, right? And that's where I get really reminded of George Orwell's 1984, because it's sort of these secret people who are trying to take down the government, and you kind of only find out about that towards the end of the book. But that's kind of one of the main themes. Another one of the big themes is it's just like the typical good versus evil, right? So you have the adult working class, and it kind of says that it's kind of saying like kids versus adults, and in this book, like all the kids, I mean, there's no kids in this book that are referenced as like good kids. They're all like these Nadsat speaking, evil, violent doers, right? And so it's kind of like this dystopian future is kind of like the kids trying to take power over the adults, and they're just beating up the adults and stuff, and they don't like people who are like literate and like literature and stuff. And so Alex and his gang are beating up writers, and then they're beating up people who are reading books and all this crazy stuff. But that kind of links back to this choice of this theme of being able to make a choice, because they're trying to eradicate that, but it's kind of like, they're forcing people to do that, and that's kind of what the people in the end of this book are talking about. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world. I've been getting some really, really nice comments recently. I've been having so much fun with this channel. It's just been it's been life-changing for me. I don't know, I've only posted like 8, 9, 10 videos or whatever, but already the community engagement, I love reading all your comments and stuff like that, and it's just made my life so much happier. So your support means the world, and as I always like to say, keep reading. Peace out.